Tales for Dark Nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
A couple of weeks ago, I sat on a discussion panel with a team of paranormal investigators at a local Halloween convention. I don't know how or why, but I think my being around them caught the attention of something, and I think it's trying to hurt or even kill me. The discussion was nothing crazy, no Ouija boards or seances or anything. A husband and wife had lived in an old house in Georgia somewhere and had experienced phenomena that could only be described as paranormal. The pair had moved from that house and discovered that wherever they went afterward, they would notice similar things, as if their exposure to this strange energy gave them an insight or extra sense to the things beyond the veil. Their stories were interesting and spooky, and above all else, they were genuine. I know there are many out there who do not believe in life after death, spirits, or extrasensory perceptions, but these people did. Their stories were true, at least to them, and in the telling, there was no guile. Everything they said, they believed. I was merely a moderator in this discussion. It was my job to ask questions, round us back to center if the conversation went too far off topic, and watch the time. It was not in my purview to judge or pose skepticism. This was an event to celebrate the strange and unusual, after all, and this discussion fit right in. The panel went well, and everyone had a good time. I'd been meaning to reach out to the couple again to have them on my podcast. Their stories were engaging and interesting, the perfect subject matter for the spooky season. But it's also a very busy time for me and my family, so I've been putting it off so that I can get the house ready for the epic Halloween party we throw every year. Tuesday night was like any other. I sat in my office and read a bit before writing down a couple story ideas and making some notes. I was usually tired from the day, so I decided to watch some YouTube videos and play online rather than try to focus on anything too serious. I kicked around for an hour or so and then finally gave up and turned in at about 10:30. The next morning, I was strangely cold. Although we did keep the thermostat lower at night than some, I was absolutely freezing and couldn't figure out why. I looked at the clock and it was only about 30 minutes before I normally got up, so I rolled out of bed and got busy starting the day. I made lunches for the kids and gathered my stuff for work, then dropped them off at school and headed into the office. My wife, Tina, had asked that I pick up a couple of things at the store that morning, and since none of them were perishable and I was in no hurry, I stopped into a Kroger to get the errand done. It was early and the store wasn't fully open yet. A few aisles still had dimmed lights, and a tired-eyed employee was running a floor buffer. I skipped past him and set about gathering my items: kids' allergy medicine, toothpaste, bread, and a present for my daughter's friend's birthday party this weekend. I grabbed the bread and headed to the other side of the store to get the medicine and toothpaste. I turned into the aisle and started looking for my brand of toothpaste when I felt a presence. I looked up to see a man staring at me. He was old, mid-70s if I had to guess, and stocky. He stood a few feet away from me and scowled. I wasn't sure what to make of this. I had no cart and wasn't in his way as far as I could tell. Still, I stepped to the side and nodded towards him, giving him the right of way. He didn't move, just stood there, looking angry. He had close-cropped white hair, light blue eyes, and a mole or a wart on his cheek. He was dressed in a white t-shirt and brown pants. He didn't look strange or homeless or anything, just angry. And whatever he was angry about, he seemed to think that I was a part of it. Perplexed, I motioned for him to pass, and when he didn't, I started to back away in the other direction. We'd just brush our teeth with mouthwash tonight. Screw this weirdness. In a flash, he was on me. One hand gripped my right arm and lifted it, while the other drove a thumb into my ribs and pushed hard. I staggered sideways into the shelving and tried to push him off of me. My ribs stung from where he jabbed them, and his grip on my arm was strong and firm. I felt myself going off balance, and at the same time felt the man lean into the fall, as if to use our momentum to drop and pin me. He growled a bit as I fell, letting me know he intended to continue this assault after we'd landed. My feet went out from under me, and we went down. I sat up in bed, completely disoriented, scared, and panicked. What had just happened? The change of scenery so suddenly was almost as bad as the attack, but what the hell had just happened? Where was I? What the hell? I rolled out of bed and shoved my glasses onto my face. I could tell Tina was there because I could hear her sleepy breathing. The clock said 1:14 a.m. Had the attack happened this morning? Why couldn't I remember? Had I been stabbed? Shouldn't I be in the hospital or something? I went to the bathroom and checked out my side and chest in the mirror. No marks to indicate having been hit. There was no pain, but there should have been. He hit me hard. I made my way to the kitchen and drank a glass of water, trying to calm my heart, which was in complete overdrive. All I could guess was that I'd been assaulted and that maybe I'd blacked out or something. I've been under sedation before, so once I got control of myself, I could start thinking rationally about what could have happened that I simply missed for whatever reason. I sat on the sofa in my living room and scrolled on my phone for a moment before I noticed something. I'd seen all of these posts, and recently. I moved through another dozen or more before it struck me. I closed the app and looked at the date. It was still only Tuesday night, or at least it was very early Wednesday morning. I hadn't woken up early on Wednesday to get my kids ready and stop at the store on my way into work. I had not encountered an angry old man in the toothpaste aisle and lost a bunch of memories. Had it all been a dream? The relief I felt when I realized what had happened was immense. Just a dream. Nothing to worry about. But it had been so real and so realistic. I had most certainly gotten up and made the kids lunch. I had. My kids had been excited about having the new jelly on their toast, and I'd had to send the younger one to get her mom to help with her hair because it was too tangled for me to deal with and make breakfast at the same time. Then the older one needed help with finishing her homework. This was too real. What dream that ends with a strange old guy beating you up for no reason begins with toast, jam, and doing actual math problems on an iPad? I've had a lot of weird dreams, but nothing even close to this one. A while later, after all rational thought had returned, and so did the realization that in the morning I would have to get up and actually make breakfast for my kids rather than just imagining it, I decided to go back to bed. I plugged my phone back in, turned off the lights, and lay back down. I did not pull the covers over me because, bizarre dreams or not, I'm a hot sleeper and can't get comfortable under the covers. I just lay there and dozed, ironically hoping that the monsters under the bed weren't hungry for grown-up feed. I can only assume I dozed quickly because the next thing I knew, it was nearly 3. I woke up shivering and terribly cold. I felt around for the blanket and pulled it over me, but then immediately began to sweat from being too hot. I decided I needed to go and check the thermostat and make sure one of the kids hadn't set it to Arctic by mistake. I went down the hall and checked, but there was nothing wrong. In fact, it was a couple degrees warmer than we usually kept it. I made my way back to bed. Tina moved fitfully, clearly unhappy with my nocturnal adventures, and I rolled in next to her and tried to get comfortable again. Hot. Too hot. Sweating. Half asleep, I kicked my feet out from under the covers and lay there, just trying to cool off and get this strange night behind me. It was almost 4 now, and I was mostly awake, being frustrated, too cold, too hot, or too something to sleep. I rolled over, away from Tina and toward the wall, and looked right into the face of the old man from the grocery store. His scowl was more of a smile now, and his eyes bore into me. He knelt beside the bed and considered me for a moment. I couldn't move. I could barely even breathe, my voice trapped somewhere deep inside me. My fear seemed to amuse the man. He stared at me and seemed almost about to laugh. Then, he narrowed his eyes and drove one of his hands into my side. I writhed in pain. Where before he had hit me with a fist and a thumb, this time he had some sort of weapon and was twisting it between 2 of my ribs. I flailed out with my left hand and grabbed at his face, trying to get an eye or something, anything to get him to release his grip, to make him let me go. I finally managed to move just enough, kicking my legs out and slipping out of his hands. I slid off the end of the bed and stood up, my arms raised in a pitiful karate stance I learned when I was 10. The man stood there and laughed silently. Then, he disappeared. My tussle with the phantom had barely registered with my sleeping wife. After my attacker had vanished, she rolled over and cozied up into the covers. She seemed cold, but otherwise unaware of our visitor. I, of course, was too shaken to sleep again that night. After a few minutes of nervous pacing, trying to decide whether what had happened had been real or a dream, I lay down beside my wife and stared at the ceiling, trying to warm up my cold feet and slow my racing heart. I was on edge the next day, tired and paranoid. I trudged through my morning, just going through the motions of getting the kids ready for school and myself ready for work. Everything startled me, made me pause. We have a stained glass window that distorts the light from the street when cars go by, and as the neighbors piled out of their garages for their morning commutes, every passing headlight hit that glass, and every reflection made my heart lurch. I dropped the kids off at school, but instead of heading into the office, I went back home. I sat on the sofa in the empty house and thought about calling in sick, or at least logging in from home. I didn't know what was happening, but something told me my violent new companion might be waiting for me somewhere out there. I tried to rationalize it away. After all, he had just attacked me in my own bedroom, so it's not like I was any safer here than anywhere else. But the idea of trying to contact and negotiate with customers in my condition just left me feeling deflated. I sat on the sofa staring at the wall for a long time before I finally decided that calling in was for the best. The day passed without incident, and so did the next and the one after that. I went back to work and was happy to not be accosted next to the copier or snack machine. After about a week, I had all but forgotten about my angry phantom. Chalk it up to stress, fatigue, or indigestion. I don't know, but things went back to normal after a few days. It was a full 2 weeks later that it happened. I was in Kroger picking up some odds and ends on the way home from work. I was weighing onions when I saw him on the other side of the produce section. A shot of adrenaline, and I began to slowly back away. He hadn't seen me, or at least wasn't looking my way. I dropped the onions into the cart, turned it the other direction, and booked it away from him as fast as I could. I was speed walking, almost running toward the exit, when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I released the cart and spun away from the man, just as he swung his fist around, barely missing my stomach. My shoes squeaked on the waxed floor as I twisted, and I could see the knife in his hand as it came within inches of my abdomen. I fell backward and he overcorrected, slamming into a gondola and knocking it over, merchandise crashing all around. I regained my footing in time to avoid another slash, and then I was moving away from him as fast as I could, scrambling for a weapon, anything I could use against this manic assault. I grabbed a bottle of vinegar and heaved it at him, but it went wide and crashed somewhere behind him without effect. He stood and smiled at me, icy blue eyes twinkling with glee. Although I had no idea what was going on, this guy was clearly having a good time. I took a step backward and he took one forwards, the knife gleaming in his hand. I grabbed another bottle of something and threw it, and again it didn't land. What was happening? I took another step backward, and then he broke into a sprint, closing the gap between us in seconds. I tried to turn and run, but he was too fast. The crazy old man crashed into me and we both tumbled to the ground as his weapon found purchase, digging deep under my ribs before he laughed and twisted it deeper. I screamed as his cold eyes bore into mine, and he smiled, his mission apparently accomplished. And then I woke up with tubes in my nose and an IV in my arm. Of course, I'd been assaulted, stabbed. The guy, the ghost, had stabbed me. As I struggled to come awake, the vague, faraway feeling of pain in my side let me know I was right. I glanced around and found a call button. I was thirsty. A few minutes later, a nurse came in and brought me some ice chips and offered me some juice. She took her readings and made her notes, and then said that the doctor would be in to see me shortly. A couple minutes after that, Tina came in, her eyes puffy from crying and lack of sleep. She sobbed as she leaned in for a hug, not too tightly, and then wiped her eyes and nose on a tissue. She pulled a chair over and sat holding my hand until the doctor came in. "Well, Mr. Baker, that was a close one, but we have you all back together now. How are you feeling?" I began to try to speak, but the tubes got in the way, so I gave a weak thumbs up. The doctor said a few things to Tina as she stood up and hugged him before wiping her eyes again. Did you catch him?" I asked, despite the tubes. The doctor and Tina both looked at me. The doctor raised an eyebrow and a glance was passed between them. "Who, honey?" Tina asked. The man who did this to me, who stabbed me. Did they catch him?" The doctor smiled and said to Tina, "That's just the anesthesia wearing off. He should be fine in a bit." I looked at my wife, waiting for an answer. I was weak and in pain, but almost desperate to find out what was going on. "Honey, nobody stabbed you. Your appendix ruptured. You were in the grocery store yesterday when you started screaming and collapsed. They brought you here and did emergency surgery to take it out." "I imagine it did feel a bit like getting stabbed," the doctor added. "I've seen a lot of burst appendixes in my time, but yours was pretty bad. But you'll be okay now." He made a few notes and then left the room. The nurse pushed some pain medicine through the IV and she left too. Tina and I stared at one another for a while before she got up. "I have to go pick up the kids. I'll drop them off with your mom and be back up here in a couple of hours. I love you." "I love you too," I mouthed to her as she moved towards the door. I watched as she swung the big, weighted door open and passed through. The medicine caused my vision to fade as I caught a glimpse of the nurse's station right across the hall. And in the nurse's station stood a man, 70-ish, with close-cropped white hair, ice blue eyes, and a mole on his right cheek. As the door swung shut and my vision blurred, he held up a knife, a much bigger one this time, and grinned.
Chilling tales for dark nights.